The sweltering afternoon of the summer of 2025, the courtroom in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, felt like a stifling space as waves of heat poured in from outside. The ceiling fan buzzed, not enough to dispel the heavy atmosphere that enveloped the room. All sounds seemed to blend into each other, from the rustling of papers by the secretary to the whispers of the audience sitting around. The blinding sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows on the old wooden benches, creating an even more silent and tense atmosphere. Abigail Abby Thornton sat on the judge's bench, her demeanor stern in a black robe. She was 45 years old, but those sharp eyes seemed to have lost their youthful sparkle. Those eyes hold deep memories that few can understand. Abby is known for her fairness and determination, but few know that behind her precise and unbiased judgments lies a haunting from the past, a vow she broke, and a dear friend who left her forever. She was exhausted after a long day of hearing cases, holding the wooden gavel, preparing for the next trial. A case not new, yet another lost soul in the legal system that she had seen too many times. Such faces were all too familiar to her, and the atmosphere in this courtroom seemed to have become a part of her life. The host's voice cut through her thoughts. The state of Louisiana is suing Marcus Reed, charges of assault, robbery, and resisting arrest. Abby skimmed through the case file, sighing. It was yet another typical case of those who had lost their way, unable to find the path back. But when the defendant walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere in the room seemed to come to a standstill. Marcus Reed, that man, hands and feet shackled, wearing a light gray prison uniform, his thin shoulders trembling slightly, walked in with eyes full of anticipation. Abby was stunned. She clearly saw that face, the face of Marcus, her childhood best friend, the one she had sworn to protect under the shade of the oak tree in her garden. It felt as if everything around her suddenly became dull. Abby gripped the wooden hammer tightly in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She wondered in her mind, why is he here? What did I do to make him like this? Memories of the beautiful childhood years, of the promises made when they were carefree children, are now clashing with the responsibilities of a judge, a job she has dedicated her life to building a career in. The clash between the past and the present, between friendship and justice, makes it impossible for her to break free from the chaotic emotions. Marcus's deep brown eyes met Abby's gaze. A flicker of surprise flashed in his eyes before quickly dropping, as if trying to avoid being recognized by her. In that moment, a painful distance enveloped the space between them, leaving Abby breathless. She whispered to herself, the words barely escaping, "No, it can't be him." Abby's mind drifted back to the past, to the summer of the 90s in Hammond, Louisiana, when everything was simple and carefree. She saw herself, at 12 years old, running along the creek bank behind the house, her bare feet smeared with red mud, laughter echoing through the golden barley fields under the sunset. The long grasses swayed in the wind, reflecting the late afternoon sunlight, creating a dreamy atmosphere that Abby still vividly remembers now that she has grown up. Her house had a charming white fence surrounding it, while Marcus's house was just a rickety wooden cabin, rustic beside the pothole-filled dirt road, where dust and dry leaves were always present in the air. Those were the happy days, when the children had no worries, when everything was just carefree games and limitless dreams. Abby remembers clearly. They met for the first time when Marcus pulled her up from the stream, just as she was about to fall into the crystal clear water while chasing a blue butterfly. Marcus was the only friend she trusted, and from that moment on, their friendship became inseparable. They became secret friends, often hiding under the shade of the old oak tree to share dreams about the future. Marcus said with hopeful eyes, "I will become a pilot, flying away from this town." Abby smiled, a dreaminess shining in her eyes. "I'll be a lawyer, protecting you from trouble." They cut their hands, swearing with blood, the unspoken promise, always together no matter what. An innocent yet profound vow, a commitment between two children before a life full of challenges. But like all beautiful things in life, their friendship did not last forever. It was threatened by prejudice and discrimination. One day, Abby's father, Sheriff Henry Thornton, caught them under the oak tree, where they were sitting and talking about their unrealistic dreams. He shouted angrily, "Get inside right now, Abigail! Don't get involved with that guy!" Marcus stood still, his eyes full of hurt, not saying a word. Abby wanted to resist, but the fear of her father left her with no choice but to step inside the house. Later, Marcus's family suddenly moved away without a word of farewell, leaving Abby with an indescribable sense of regret. She didn't know the reason, only felt that she had lost an important part of her life and could do nothing to keep it. As time passed, Abby threw herself into studying law, not only out of a passion for justice, but also because a deep part of her wanted to atone, to find Marcus again, to protect him, the friend who had been left behind. She became a judge, working on cases that sometimes made her feel like she was seeking justice, not only for society, but also for herself. But when she looked at Marcus, her childhood friend, now standing in handcuffs, she couldn't help but wonder, can I atone for my sins, or is it too late? The sound of a hammer striking echoed from the next room, jolting Abby back to reality. She whispered, her voice barely above a whisper, as if apologizing to an old friend. Marcus, I'm sorry. The courtroom was silent to the point of suffocation, the tension so palpable that one could hear the faintest breaths of those sitting around. When Marcus stepped up to the defendant's stand, each of his footsteps seemed to stretch an extra second. The handcuffs clinked, the sound echoing like a warning, the light gray prison uniform clinging to his emaciated body, every feature on him reflecting his decline. The messy hair and pale skin made him look nothing like the childhood friend Abby once knew. And then their eyes met. That moment, no words could describe it. Marcus's eyes, momentarily surprised, immediately drooped, but Abby could sense the painful distance in that gaze. The atmosphere in the room became heavier than ever, as if time had stopped and everything around them had vanished. She couldn't take her eyes off him, and although she was the judge, her heart couldn't help but break. Abby struggled fiercely within herself. She is a judge. She must be impartial and fair. But when she saw Marcus, haggard in prison clothes, charged with a serious crime, she couldn't detach herself from their past. Memories of childhood, of vows under the oak tree, of unfulfilled dreams, all flooded her mind. Can I be fair, she wondered, or will I let memories cloud everything? Her voice trembled as she asked the first question. Mr. Reed, you are accused of assault and robbery. How do you plead? Marcus looked up, his eyes empty yet resolute. He replied hoarsely, his voice having lost the warmth of old. Not guilty, Your Honor. His voice was strange, but Abby still recognized it. It evoked memories of the long nights they whispered under the moonlight, the stories without beginnings or ends, the promises that could not be kept. Prosecutor Victor Hayes stood up, his voice strong and devoid of sympathy. Marcus Reed attacked a convenience store clerk in Baton Rouge, knocked him out, and stole $300 in cash. This is an undeniable violent offender. Abby listened to every word, but her mind was in turmoil. What Hayes said was completely contrary to the friend she once knew. Marcus, who always dreamed of flying far away from this town, who once swore not to let anyone harm each other, how could he become such a violent person? She couldn't believe it, but the reality is unfolding before her eyes, and justice demands that she do something. When the court session was temporarily adjourned, Assistant Clara approached Abby, looking at her with concern. Judge, are you okay? You look like you've just seen a ghost. Abby shook her head, trying to regain the lost composure. I'm fine. But she knew she wasn't okay. Every cell in her body wanted to run to Marcus, to demand he tell the truth, to hear from him the reasons behind it all. But the heavy judge's robe held her back, like an invisible wall separating her from the friend she had once sworn to protect. As the trial continued, Abby watched Marcus being led away, his hands still shackled, his face full of fatigue and despair. Her heart was heavy, as if there were an unfillable void. What should I do, Marcus? She whispered in her heart, unable to speak. I can't lose you again. The feeling of guilt loomed over her heart like a large shadow, and she knew, no matter what, she would have to find a way to help him. Because after all, Marcus was still the only friend she could trust in this life. The second day of the trial, the courtroom became packed, the atmosphere tense like a taut string. Reporters sat taking notes with their pens clicking incessantly, the whispers of the audience rising like an unavoidable background score. The light from the large window shone on Prosecutor Victor Hayes' desk, where he confidently presented the evidence. He stood there, looking confident, but Abby couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Everything was too hasty, too ready to condemn, but she couldn't forget what she had witnessed in the past, the things behind Marcus's gaunt and weary eyes. Marcus's case file is filled with minor offenses, such as petty theft and disorderly conduct, but nothing related to violence. This makes Abby deeply suspicious. The system has turned him into this, or has he really changed? She wondered. She couldn't shake the feeling that a part of the story had been overlooked. She realized that societal prejudice might have pushed Marcus into this spiral, an issue not new, a problem all too familiar in Louisiana. A young person like him, growing up in poverty, in an environment that does not allow for forgiveness, can he avoid collapse? This feeling became even clearer as Prosecutor Hayes continued to present. He presented Marcus's profile, focusing on minor incidents without mentioning the factors that might have contributed to those actions. He didn't let justice see the full picture, only painting a part of the story. Next is the witness, a convenience store employee named Tommy. He was trembling, his face full of worry when called to the witness stand. He was wearing a red hoodie, punched me, and stole $300 in cash, Tommy testified. But when defense attorney Sarah Miles questioned him, "Did you see his face clearly?" Tommy hesitated. "Not really. It was very dark." This answer made the light of truth begin to waver. Abby sensed the ambiguity in the testimony, and a deep-seated doubt began to rise within her. When the surveillance video was played on the big screen, a figure in a red hoodie appeared, but the image was blurry, making it impossible to identify the person. All eyes in the room were glued to the screen, but no one could say for sure that this was Marcus. Abby looked at Marcus. He sat silently, his eyes glued to the screen. But then, a small glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes when Sarah rebutted, "This is not convincing evidence." The situation suddenly became more tense when Sarah called an unexpected witness, Joe, a homeless man living near the convenience store. The courtroom fell silent as Joe stepped up to the witness stand. He testified, "I saw another guy running out of the store before the police arrived. He was taller than Marcus, with a snake tattoo on his arm." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned towards Joe, but Prosecutor Victor wouldn't let it go. He roared, "A fabricated testimony from a drunkard." However, Abby couldn't shake the feeling that Joe's testimony might be the key to uncovering the truth. Although Victor had criticized the witness, Abby sensed that something was being revealed, a truth gradually emerging from the shadows. The courtroom was buzzing. Everyone was discussing this surprise, but Abby kept her eyes fixed on Marcus. She knew that the story was not over, and very likely it would lead to a path she could never have imagined. But in Abby's heart, there was a question that could never be extinguished. She looked at Marcus. His eyes no longer held hope, but only the weariness and silence of someone who had given up. "If you are innocent, why aren't you saying anything?" she wondered in her heart. "Or have you given up all hope?" A feeling of helplessness and anxiety surged within her as she realized that this was no longer just Marcus's battle, but her own, a battle between justice and memory. On the third day of the trial, the courtroom became crowded again, the atmosphere suffocating and heavy like before a storm. All eyes were fixed on the witness stand, where Sarah Miles, the defense attorney, was preparing to make a risky decision. She called Marcus to the stand, and in that moment, the entire courtroom seemed to fall into absolute silence. Marcus walked, each heavy step of his shackled feet clinking, shattering the silence. Under the cold white light, his gaze was resolute yet weary, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Abby couldn't take her eyes off him, feeling as if everything around her was turning into a dense fog. She saw Marcus standing there, no longer the dreamy young man he once was, but now a man shrouded in layers of guilt he did not cause. His physical and spiritual imprisonment was clear, undeniable. Marcus began to speak, his voice deep and firm, but not without a touch of vulnerability. "I didn't do it," he said, each word cutting into Abby's heart. "That night, I walked past the store after my shift. The police stopped me, saw the money in my pocket, money I earned, and concluded I was the culprit. I am tired of having to prove that I am not a bad person." His voice broke, a choked sigh. "My whole life has been a battle, and I lost from the moment I was born in this town." Those words were like a deep wound piercing Abby's heart. Those words, filled with helplessness and overflowing with pain, made her unable to ignore the injustice that Marcus had endured throughout his life. Prosecutor Victor, unable to tolerate Marcus's emotional outburst, immediately countered, "You have money, we're near the scene, and a criminal record." What do you expect the jury to believe? Marcus did not back down. He replied, his voice firm yet tinged with despair, "Believe in the truth, even though it rarely stands by someone like me." The courtroom fell silent, as if a strong wind had just swept through, making everyone reconsider. Abby felt the change in the atmosphere, a shift that was hard to reverse. But then, an unexpected situation occurred. Sarah stood up, deciding to present the final piece of evidence, a recording from the traffic camera near the convenience store. The video shows Marcus leaving the area 15 minutes before the robbery occurred. The entire courtroom was shaken, eyes began to waver, and doubt gradually appeared on the faces of the jurors. The expert confirmed the authenticity of the recording, causing Prosecutor Victor to turn pale. He shouted in anger, "This is a forgery!" But the courtroom was no longer silent. Whispers and conversations echoed everywhere. The jury's gaze wavered between suspicion and empathy. Some people began to look at Marcus differently, not as a criminal, but as someone who might be innocent. Abby felt the emotions welling up inside her, her tears on the verge of spilling. Marcus's words pierced her heart like a dagger. "I abandoned him, and now the system is doing the same." She couldn't help but think about everything that had happened, about how she had let Marcus fall into the whirlpool of prejudices of an unjust society. She realized that justice is not just the verdicts in the courtroom, but also the rectification of injustices that have persisted for decades, starting with her own mistakes, from not standing up to protect Marcus when it was most needed. When the courtroom was still buzzing, Abby looked at Marcus, his eyes weary, but with a glimmer of hope. She whispered to herself, her lips moving, "I won't let you lose again, Marcus." Not this time. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't stand still, couldn't let him continue to suffer. She would not let the innocent vow under the old oak tree be broken forever. The last day of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom was as heavy as the gray sky outside the window. The dark clouds rolled in, covering the sky, making the light outside seem to be swallowed up. The courtroom seemed to be engulfed in tension, with every breath feeling the weight of the impending decision. Prosecutor Victor Hayes emphasized the circumstantial evidence, trying to convict Marcus, while Sarah Miles, the defense attorney, urged everyone to look at the truth. "We cannot rely on assumptions. We must look at what actually happened," Sarah declared, firmly asserting Marcus's innocence. The jury deliberated for a full 5 hours, each minute dragging on like an entire century. Abby couldn't sit still. Her mind was constantly anxious. She gripped the wooden hammer tightly in her hand, her fingers pale with tension. All the questions kept echoing in her head. Is there any justice here? Am I doing the right thing? Is Marcus really innocent? Those chaotic emotions couldn't be dispelled, and she could only wait. Finally, the footsteps of the head juror echoed, breaking the prolonged silence. He stood up, delivering a verdict that left everyone in the courtroom holding their breath. "We find the defendant Marcus Reed not guilty." The courtroom immediately erupted with applause, whispers, and a few cheers from Marcus's supporters. But amidst the commotion, Marcus only sighed in relief, his body seemingly relaxing after a prolonged nightmare. However, his eyes remained somber, unable to hide the pain within. Freedom is a gift that cannot erase the scars of prejudice and the losses he has endured. After the courtroom fell silent, Marcus approached Abby. He looked at her with eyes that were not exactly reproachful, but filled with a sadness he could not hide. "You didn't say anything about me, did you? Are you scared?" Abby choked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked into Marcus's eyes, her heart tightening. "No, I'm afraid of losing justice for you. I'm sorry for that day, for not keeping the vow under the oak tree." Marcus nodded, his voice deep but filled with profound understanding. "Keeping your word today is enough." He turned away, his back straight but lonely under the dim light of the courtroom. He didn't turn back, as if there was nothing left to say, but his silence spoke volumes. Abby stood still, watching Marcus's figure gradually disappear. She felt the change within herself. From a rigid judge living in blind faith in the system, she has now become a determined reformer. The pain and hope are intertwined in her heart. She knew that this fight was not over, it had only just begun. As for Marcus, despite being free, he remains a symbol of those abandoned by society. But he found a small light in the darkness, a light that Abby had ignited, even though it couldn't illuminate everything. Abby stood in the empty courtroom, holding a wooden hammer, looking through the window as the rain began to fall, each drop rolling down the glass like unspoken feelings. She whispered, her words a promise to herself, "This is just the beginning." Abby stepped out of the courthouse, the light rain falling on her shoulders, soaking through her black cloak, but she didn't mind. All the feelings within her seemed to have become a part of the rain. The gray sky stretched above like her mood, heavy, but also containing something deeper, a change gradually taking shape. The sound of rain pattering mixed with the distant noise of vehicles on the streets of Baton Rouge, the steady sounds like the heartbeat of a world continuing to move, despite what had happened in the courtroom. She stopped, stood under the rain, looking towards the horizon, where the gray sky was gradually changing color. It feels like everything is changing, not just in the space around her, but within herself. Abby whispered, her voice gentle yet firm, "I won't abandon anyone anymore, Marcus." These words were like a commitment, an unbreakable promise. She decided, at all costs, to use her position as a judge to change the system, to restore justice for people like Marcus, those who have been burdened by prejudice their entire lives, simply because they do not fit into the mold that society has drawn. People like him, like her, have lived in the shadow of injustice for too long. And now, Abby knows that life is not just about judgments on paper, but about the struggle against prolonged injustices. Justice is not an event, but a process, an action that requires courage and perseverance. She will start right here, from herself. The sound of the rain was a reminder of the vow made under the oak tree long ago, a vow that she had not kept. But today, in her actions, she has resurrected that vow. She will not let people like Marcus continue to live in the darkness of misguided judgment. They deserve a chance to be seen correctly, and she will be the one to bring that opportunity. Justice is not just a verdict, a line on paper. Justice is atonement. It is the relentless struggle against injustice, the awareness and confrontation of society's mistakes. Abby and Marcus, though standing on opposite sides of the system, are two sides of a society full of prejudice. One seeks to rectify the mistakes of the past, while the other endures and fights to survive in an unjust world. Abby stood in the rain, a faint smile blooming on her lips. Not victory, but hope. She knows the road ahead will be difficult, full of challenges and hardships, but this time she will not turn her back. This time she will not let this system continue to lunge people like Marcus into darkness. She would stand up no matter how arduous the path might be, because in Marcus's eyes, in the promises they exchanged under the old oak tree, she knew that it was the only path to find justice again. And under the rain, Abby realized that this was just the beginning.